What a limiter can tell you about is the spectral balance, or just like the EQ balance of your mix. Automating the master fader is super powerful. It's what make people like hype when they listen to the song. They're like, damn, this, like they feel every section. I've used them on like delay and reverb returns where I kind of put the ceiling like at the maximum level and then wave shape them quite a bit. And so then that creates distortion. It brings up the tails. But the point truly of clippers is to...
Hey Ryan, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to have me.
So I want to talk about clippers. It's like a new thing for me. I've been playing with them, I guess, for a couple of months. I don't still understand them at all. So my first question is, what are the most common mistakes when working with clippers?
I think the first mistake that most people make is just over clipping, right? You can do the over clipping thing, and that's like a really over the top, aggressive, blown out, distorted, intentional decision. But the point truly of clippers is to create a little bit more headroom so that a limiter does less work. And that can be done through... A clipper is essentially a wave shaper. I don't want to get into what that means too much, but there's hard clipping and soft clipping. And like hard clipping is like when you just literally snip off the peaks and it flatlines it for you. Much like if you use a limiter too aggressively, you'll see a flat line in a waveform. It'll basically do that for you. And what you're trying to do is like precisely put it on peaks, because what you're doing is replacing the transient with a quick bit of distortion, and our ear hears that quick bit of distortion as if it was actually the transient. And then the outcome is the peaks are down, the limiter's doing less work, right? And so a clipper is literally, you're trying to work at the extremes of the signal, the peaks of the signal, just to bring them in a little bit. What a lot of people do is they'll overclip, and then when you turn that up with a limiter after it, it's going to kind of magnify all of that distortion that gets added.
Perfect. And what was the difference between hard clipping and soft clipping?
So hard clipping is like there's literally no change in the signal right up until it gets to a break point, like a hard ceiling on a limiter. Like a limiter does nothing up until it gets to the ceiling. And then a soft clipper, think about the signal going up towards the ceiling. But what a soft clipper will do is it'll slowly start to turn it down, almost like a knee on a compressor, right? You can have like a hard knee on a compressor. It's not going to compress right till it gets there. You can have a hard knee on a clipper or a soft knee on a clipper where it starts to bend or wave shape the signal. So it starts to kind of change it so that it gets rounder, right? On orange clip, you can make it go from hard to soft. And then on gold clip, there's like 3 different settings. There's like hard and then or hard, modern, and classic. And they're like different variations of hard, soft, and medium knee, I guess. And so it's essentially just like changing the trajectory of the waveform, where normally you'd have like, if you have like a sharp transient, right, it's going to not really affect it too much because it's just going to see the absolute maximum of it and it's going to clip it there. But a hard and soft knee kind of has a different tonality. So a hard knee will not interject distortion up until it gets to the clip point, and then soft knee will slowly interject more and more distortion as it approaches the clip point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So it's very much like it's easy to think about it like a hard knee and soft knee on a compressor if you have like a strong understanding of that. Like when I use a hard knee on a compressor, it's more aggressive and sounds bitey and more harmonic. When you use a soft knee, it tends to like shape the sounds to make them feel soft and intimate, right? And so a lot of times when I'm using a compressor, I'm like, oh, I want this to be like more round, so I'm gonna use a soft knee. If I want things to be more bitey and aggressive, I'm gonna use a hard knee. The action of a clipper is similar, but the way that it creates harmonics is different from the way that it works in a compressor.
Perfect. And what's the best way to learn how to clip?
I would say, like having a really good monitoring environment and learning how to clip in really detailed micro ways, right? with something like Gold Clip, where there's a couple different processors going on, you can just take everything off, like take off Gold, take off Alchemy, take off Box Tone, and just deal with the clipper and the ceiling. But the best way to do it is to put it in front of a limiter, right? And then make the clipper not add any gain to the signal. So like in Gold Clip or Orange Clip, you can just bring down the ceiling. And what that will do is just kind of like move the clip point further and further away. So say like your limiter's at 0 and you're adding 2 dB of gain. If you bring this clip ceiling down to -2, it's going to clip off everything below that. And then that 2 dB of gain on the limiters going to only be adding gain. It's not going to be doing any gain reduction. So we basically took the gain reduction from the limiter and moved it over to the clipper. 2 dB is kind of a lot. Generally, I'll start with like 1 dB because most of my work is in mastering, and what I'm trying to do is be as transparent as possible, right? I'm not out here like, oh, I'm going to put some clipping and distort it and all this stuff, unless I like it needs to be stupid loud. Like I did this record, this like drum and bass record the other day that needed to be like -2 loops, which is just stupid loud. But that's what the artist wanted. And I was like, I can do that. I got a couple of ways to make stuff crazy loud and still sound punchy. It's aggressive, it's distorted for sure, but it's also the aesthetic that they wanted. But yeah, I mean, my best suggestion of how to learn it is to put it in front of a final limiter and start to put the gain reduction that's on the final limiter and put it over to the clipper. You can start with just a 0.5 dB, then you can start with 1 dB. And basically what you'll hear is like the limiter sounding less disruptive, right? You're hearing less modulate changes in the balance of the mix because of the limiter. A lot of times when you have a limiter and it's overworking, you can hear the low end buckling down the top end or the mid range. So basically what clipping will do is it'll pull that energy off the limiter a little bit, put it onto the clipper, which can be a little bit more transparent in small incremental doses, hidden doses, and now the limiter sounds more clean. So putting them with a limiter and trying to redistribute the gain reduction between the two is probably the cleanest and most eye-opening way to do it. And when you do that, make sure that the clipper isn't adding gain, because obviously if it's adding gain, you turn it on and off, you'll be like, oh, it obviously sounds way better, but you might less notice the distortion that it's adding then. If you can turn the clipper off and the volume doesn't change, but now the gain reduction is totally pushed over to the limiter, then you're going to be hearing the benefits of clipping and the benefits of the limiter sounding better because there's some clipping, but you're getting a bit of added distortion. Or when you turn off the clipper, all the gain reduction goes in the limiter. Now you're hearing some of the what's called intermodulation, the way that the limiter is interacting with the low end and the mid range. And you're just listening to how that gain reduction gets passed between the two. That's the way I would work with it.
Are there any instruments where you would never put a clipper?
Yeah, I mean, things that you want to be very clean, right? So if I had like a prepared vocal, like say I was like mastering a record and they gave me like instrumental and vocal, if I put a clipper on the vocal, and the vocal already has like reverbs and delays and stuff on it, it's not really going to help it because all I'm doing is inserting just bits of distortion into the vocal. And that's not what anybody asked for, right? I mean, you can just think of a clipper as a distortion device. When do I want to add distortion to something? That can be the decision process. And sometimes that is vocals, right? If you want to add distortion to just the mid-range, you could do that with a multi-band clipper like Orange Clip. Or if you wanted to just like, something was very spiky, you could do it. But it works best on stuff that is very peaky, right? Like drums, where there's a really aggressive peaks that you need to pull down, maybe percussion, things that have big transient jumps that you want to like psychoacoustically appear to still sound dynamic, but you want to like constrain it a little bit. And, there's other tools for it to do that as well, compressors and limiters, but it's another tool in the toolbox. But yeah, I wouldn't use it on a prepared vocal, like a finished vocal maybe, but you could do soft clipping on it where it doesn't actually cross the clip point, but it's just kind of slowly rounding it out and adding harmonics. That can be better. So it's a gray area. It's obviously we're making art, so it doesn't really matter, but, clippers are generally used on drums and whole mixes, I'd say, for the most part.
And what is the best way to compare one clipper to another?
Equal gain, so that they're not both not adding gain, that they're kind of just maintaining unity pass through is obviously for any comparing anything is super important. And then to me, like as I was saying earlier, like clipping, it's really important to like be precise and be able to kind of like dial in where the clipping happens and know how much it's doing and be kind of like strategic about how you're using it. If the goal is to make something like clean and loud, the gain staging of the plugin is really important, and the like workflow metering and readouts, right? And that's why when I make Gold Clip, I put so much into the metering, like being able to see the maximum amount of clipping that happened throughout the song. And then at the bottom, there's something called a clip clock, and you can actually see that at 1 minute and 30 seconds into the song is where the most amount of clipping happens. So then you can go to that section of the song, listen to it, and be like, that's too much distortion, or that's fine, right? And so those types of details of like giving you information of how much clipping, where it's happening, and then you can actually make qualitative decisions about like, is this better or not? Because you can do harm with clipping, like a lot of people like just put it on, do like 6 dB of clipping, and they're like, why is it distorted? I'm like, because you're doing 6 dB clipping, and so, yeah, I think having the tools and the UI can really make you work. It can help you use clipping to your advantage.
Right. And what things did you feel clippers didn't have, so you had to build one yourself?
I really did not like the design of them, like what I was just saying, the user interface experience, because they didn't have like all of the information that I wanted. Like what I wanted to be able to do was like see a ceiling, and then have like multiple ways to maintain gain. So on Gold Clip and Orange Clip, like you can pull the ceiling down to negative 36 dB and basically move the clip point around, and that will maintain volume for input and output. Then there'll be linked input and output gains that you can link them together and then maintain gain that way. And so you can always be completely precise with the unity pass through. One of the times I was always like fiddling, like turning the output down and turning the input up or moving the ceiling around, and they're all kind of like set up differently. Some of them are just like input gain and output gain, and you kind of got to like move things around until it sounds even and then make the judgment. But to me, when I open a plugin, I want to like open it up, look at it for 2 seconds, listen to it, and close it. Like I don't want to have to like figure out if I'm adding gain, or I want to just know, right? And so another thing that I put in, like Gold Clip has the gold processing, which is like this like additive wave shaper. And another thing I put there is just like a unity button, so that as it adds gain, as the signal goes closer and further from the clip point, the unity button kind of just neutralizes it. So all you're listening to is the peak reduction, which doesn't have as much of a apparent loudness to it. It doesn't like it doesn't give like a quick instant gratification of saying, oh, it's louder, it's better. You can like turn that off. And so there's all these different ways which you can like maintain transparent or unity pass through, so that you can use the plugin in a way that you know exactly what you're doing to the signal. Where the other time when I was using other plugins, I was just like, wasn't quite sure. And then like the sound of them wasn't great either. I spent a lot of time, and there's a lot of like behind the scenes infrastructure in Gold Clip, like with anti-derivative, anti-aliasing filtering, and some like modulating filters, behind hypersonic filters that happen behind the scenes as the amplitude of the input signal changes. And there's some like pretty sophisticated things. And then Alchemy it does a gain reduction of the high end as the low end increases in volume. And so there's all these like intercommunicating parts in Gold Clip that kind of sum to this symphony of like very minimal gain manipulations that just to my ear sound really sophisticated and beautiful.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you always use the clipper before the limiter?
Yes. Generally, a limiter is its intention is to be as clean as possible. Um, and so the way that I thought about when I was building Gold Clip and Orange Clip was that they were in support of a final limiter, right? And so what they're doing is reducing the peaks before a final limiter kind of sets the output level. And so I always use it before a limiter, but I know people that don't. I know people that use it as the last tool in the toolbox, and that works too, because there's like this really sophisticated um, anti-overshoot oversampling tech that like keeps the peaks at the ceiling level. So a lot of times if you use oversampling with other plugins, the peaks will, after that does downsampling, the peaks will rewrite above the ceiling level, and they'll either put another clipper after it, which doesn't have oversampling. So then it'll just clip off all those peaks and then create a little bit of aliasing. But we kind of had developed this technique of managing those peaks without using a secondary clipper. And so you can use it as like a final output level if you wanted to. But I've been using Isotope primarily for that now.
What's the strangest situation where you've used the clipper and like the result?
Um, I would say on like effects returns. I've used them on like delay and reverb returns where I kind of put the ceiling like at the maximum level and then wave shape them quite a bit. And so then that creates distortion to the reverb or delay, but it's very subtle and it creates like a maximum, puts like a maximum peak on them as well that it doesn't go over. And then also if you're using like Gold Clip or Gold Clip Track, using the additive gold processing and the additive wave shaping, it brings up the tails. And so as the kind of as the peaks like decay to the tails, it'll like increase the sustain of reverbs or delays and add a bit of harmonics to them. And so it kind of just gives this nice elegant lift to reverb returns, which you wouldn't normally think to clip reverb returns, but it sounds quite nice. Yeah.
So let's talk about mixing for a bit.
Sure.
So when mixing, how do you keep the artist's vision without limiting your own creativity?
I'm not too concerned about limiting my own creativity. My creativity is going to be in every decision that I make, right? Like if I'm mixing a record, I'm going to make 1,000 decisions, like from automation, using plugins, maybe some mix bus processing, all the decisions that go into, the sample rate I choose, every like micro detail, when did I use parallel processing for this or that? All of those things are creative decisions of like things that I've done in the past. And when I've done them, I said, oh, this is cool. This sounds good. This is the outcome. Or things I've done in the past and I say, this doesn't sound good. I don't like the way that this happened. Or things in the past that I've done and artists responded positively to. Things I've done in the past, artists responded negatively to. And I constantly kind of keeping track of those two things as you mix dozens and thousands of records, whatever. And there's a series of things that you do and artists love, which is like the good pile. There's the series of things that you do but the artist doesn't love. That's kind of like the in-between pile. And then there's the series of things that you do and you don't like and the artist never hears, which obviously is the bad pile. But those, between all of those thousands and thousands of decisions you made in the past, you're pulling from them and putting them onto the record. And to me, that's the use of your creativity, right? It's like your experience and your knowledge and you thinking what works well and the reason that people like the sound of the records that you're making. And so I don't really see it as a sacrifice when an artist has like a very specific vision, especially if you're like working in electronic music where producers are very much like auteurs and their sound is already kind of set in the types of work that they do, whether they're like heavy sample producers or, they're like big synth people or whatever their particular tonality or style of records that they make. It's not my job to go in there and be like, no, it should totally be inverted and sound like this. My job is to be like, make that artist be like, this is the most powerful, engaging, clear, transparent, like translates everywhere version of me, right? And so to me, my creativity gets executed by realizing their art,
Hmm.
and my tool set is really just to like make records sound crazy. And I don't feel like I'm ever really sacrificing my creativity, and they have to live with that record forever. And so
Hmm.
I want them to I want to like finish and high five people rather than finish and be like, I told you I was right. You know what I mean? Or something. And then like a week later, they're like, I still don't like it that way or whatever. You know what I mean? Like I'd rather high five people and just be everybody like moves forward, just hype on the outcome. Like, and that's what I think one of the things I've been doing lately is mixing a lot faster because of that, like trying to intentionally not labor over the work and overthink it, but just do the things that are like the obvious moves to me and stick with that, and don't like overcook things. Like, don't got to put plugins on every track. You don't got to do all this excessive automation. Maybe, I mean, automation is pretty powerful. I do quite a bit of that, but I just try to be more intentful and work really fast. And because I learned like I used to spend, 10, 12 hours on a mix, sometimes even more, before I'd even send a version back to an artist. And then
Hmm.
one day I think I had like a crazy deadline, and I had to like turn a mix back in like 2, 3 hours or something like that. I just put on a little timer for like 2 hours, and I like just worked so fast. I didn't stop to think. I just like went with my gut on everything. And I was like, I got to get from beginning to end in 2 hours. And it was to me like one of the best mixes I did, And so I try to like keep that energy and not draw out the process. Keep
Hmm.
it streamlined, keep it quick, keep it guttural, keep it moving.
Do you think having so many plugins options makes you focus more on the technical side than the emotional and artistic side of the song?
Having a lot of plugin options allows you to focus more.
More on the technical side instead of the emotional?
I try to not think about. I am like a mastery of technical information in my mind. That sounds arrogant. I'm very technical person.
Hmm.
Intrinsically. My father's an engineer. My grandfather's an engineer. I'm like a very process oriented person. But when I'm making records, I don't think about any of it. I don't care. I'm like, all that's garbage now. It's super good base information to teach me like, muscle memory to do things, and like I kind of work within a framework, but a framework of information. But I also try to throw that information out sometimes and basically break my own like rules of audio, because it's art. It's supposed to be fun, and you don't want to be trapped with too much knowledge. And so I actually don't use too many like different plugins. Like I use a few things that just sound great, like a clean EQ, parametric EQ, and like a couple different compressor plugins and some saturators. And I don't, unless there's like some specialty tool that I need, I'm pretty much just like keeping it super simple. Like even the greats like Stuart White, I just saw a video of him, and he was like 6 essential plugins, and he was like, the Pro Tools EQ, the Pro Tools compressor, like some really simple straight ahead plugins, because they're fine. You don't need a whole lot more. And that sounds crazy coming from somebody that makes plugins. The ones that I make, I think I need them. But and other people seem to think so too. But there's a plethora of tools out there that do the same thing, and I'm not really interested in a new interface of the same stuff. Like I'll just take the old interface and keep it moving.
Hmm. How do you handle the gain staging in your mixes?
I mean, pretty simple. I load all the stems in. I usually get stems rather than sessions. Sometimes I get sessions if there's like a really complex routing situation going on that can't really print stems. I take them, I do a session import. I look at where they sum to. I put like feed them to a master fader with nothing on it, see how much headroom I get, and I just pull them down. I just,
Hmm.
clip gain them all down, and keep the faders at unity until I get a bit of headroom, like 5 or 6 dB of headroom on the master fader, so that I can automate things and I got space. I can, do some gain manipulations. If I want to turn something up, like the kick drum up 2 dB, there's going to be enough space up there. And so I kind of just set it from the beginning, and then everything's pretty much cooked in for the rest of the mix. I mean, unless I'm doing like really big macro adjustments throughout the song, but that's pretty rare in most modern music. It's a lot of modern music's just kind of straight through and kind of pumping. So, I just give myself enough headroom so that there's a little bit of space on the mix bus where I can do some gain manipulations. I'll probably have like gold clip on there, and I'll have it so that it's doing like +4 dB of gain and -4 dB of gain. So it's the first thing on my mix bus is gold clip, and it's really good at kind of setting the gain staging for the session because of all the unity gain stuff I was talking about. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of set that thing up to get my signal, and then I can see the meters, I can see where everything is, and I can know, okay, this is going to work. Like +4, -4 is kind of my default preset for that. Not the default preset in the plugin, but my own personal default preset for it. And so I basically that means I have 4 dB of headroom essentially, but gold clip's just pushing it up right to the ceiling. And if I need to, I can pull it down and remanage that headroom.
Mm-hmm. What else are you using on your mix bus?
It's usually gold clip, and then sometimes it's gold and orange together. I really love these TDR filters, infrasonic and ultrasonic filters, and they have like another like sides filter. What's it called? I forget what it's called right now. Those are really nice just to like kind of set the bandwidth of the record. I use Leapwing DIN 1, which is like a multi-band parallel compressor, and I have this preset that I made that like matches the timings of a Meselec ML4, which is like a famous mastering compressor. And I created this preset that's like 50% wet, and it uses the timings of the Meselec, but it's variable attack and release, so it kind of like switches between the fast and slow timings of the Meselec. That preset sounds amazing. I use that quite a bit. Stage 2 for a little bit of like mid-range width, another Leapwing plugin. Sometimes I'll use 2 limiters, so I'll use like I've been really liking the AOM Invisible Limiter G3. They have like 3 of the exact same limiters, but they're all different DSP in them. But everyone loves G1, but G3 is like a little bit more complicated, so I think people are just a little off put by it. But I use that one a little bit to do like a dB or 2 of like clipping, limiting stuff. And then what else is on there? My new plugin Highfall, which is a high frequency acceleration limiter. And that's like basically a high frequency tool to tone shape and control peaks and like smooth out upper mid range. Sounds unreal. That's been on every single mix and master for the past 2 years. That one has never come off. It's an unreal, very transparent, beautiful plugin. And what else is there? That's probably the default setup. Sometimes I'll have like DMG equilibrium on there just for some tone shaping, which is like a very clean and transparent EQ. I'm building this new linear phase EQ called OmniQ that I've been using, and that has like some really interesting capabilities that I'm not at liberty to talk about yet. And so it's like bits of saturation, bits of compression. Usually it's band specific compression. I don't really do a lot of broadband compression on the mix bus. Sometimes I'll use the SSL bus compressor, that compressor from SSL, the actual SSL made one. Sometimes it's my hardware chain, which, I have the hardware chain. Like I keep saying, everything's Unity pass through. I can like insert that hardware insert, and the hardware chain is completely down to 1/10 of a dB Unity pass through. And so that has the Westinghouse or 111C transformers right there, those silver things. There's a Dangerous compressor, Lavery, Whitestone 311 or P331, excuse me. Um, Crane Song, Head Quantum 2 for DA, Levery Saviter for AD. It's very bougie setup. But I mean, that's because, I started off mastering
Hmm.
analog and but now, that's like an option more than a necessity now. Before I would never master a record without analog. And now it's like, does it need it? Because I've kind of been able to replace a lot of that stuff
Hmm.
with digital
Nice.
devices. Yeah.
Cool. Very
So
cool.
there's a lot of things. I guess I just listed a bunch of stuff. I really part of my mix bus processing is all of it's so intricately gain staged, and I can like pull things up. I have like a stream deck where I can pull up anything on my mix bus into like one button and like adjust it and make sure I'm not doing too much gain reduction or doing too much clipping or doing anything. And it's all like super managed by Gold Clip, which sets the gain staging before it. So Gold Clip determines the gain staging, and then everything off of that kind of follows suit for how the thresholds are set.
I heard in an interview that you sometimes use separate music and vocal buses. Can you explain why? Are you still
Yeah,
doing that?
I do. Yeah. I like to separate music and vocal buses because sometimes I want to treat the music more aggressively and I don't want it to affect the vocals. Like I may want added like saturation or added like bits of distortion, saturation, or compression, but I want the vocals to feel like they're almost floating separate from them.
Hmm.
Not because, I want it to feel disjointed, but if you're doing something aggressively dynamic and it's also modulating the vocals because the low end is triggering it so much, it can have like a kind of not beautiful effect on the vocal. And so I have them separated by default, but that doesn't mean that I treat the vocals and instrumental separately all the time. It's just there in the event that I do. Like one thing I have like music and vocals separated, and then they aux send to another basically aux channel that has like heavy tape compression on it that's like really blown out, and that's like down at -30. And so those two things sum to this other channel that's below it, and it's like bottom up tape compression, so it kind of like decays into this bed of tape compression. It's very subtle, but sometimes maybe I'll push the instrumental into that more than the vocals. And so, yeah, basically go from instrumental and vocals. Instrumental has all the effects and stuff from the instrumental, and vocals has all the effects from the vocals. I usually try to keep those effects separate. So there's
Hmm.
effects just for the music and effects just for the vocal, because when you print stems, it can be a little bit ugly if not. And a lot of times you have to print stems nowadays for Atmos mixes, or just labels want them archived. But yeah, I separate them, but it's more out of a functional reason than it is like I'm doing very specific processing individually.
Hmm.
It's more about print stems and making deliverables.
Yeah. I also heard that you like to use parallel distortion. Why and how do you use it?
I do love parallel distortion, and I just described basically a parallel tape distortion on the
Oh.
mix bus.
Uh-huh.
I use parallel distortion because when you add distortion to something, you're essentially taking the transient away from it, just like I was kind of explaining with clipping,
Hmm.
right? And so by putting distortion in parallel, you can do a couple things. You can like filter it, so you choose what frequency range the distortion's in, like since it's separate from the dry signal, you can like take off all the nasty top end and just kind of have mid-range distortion there. But I do it in parallel for two reasons: so that I can shape the distortion that's being added and it's kind of being put on as a residue onto that instrument, and the original instrument is pure and has its like transient detail and its like full articulation, and I'm just putting the residue on top of it, the distortion
Hmm.
residue, basically just the fatigued filtered signal on top of it. And I just love the way that it sounds because, you know, distortion's clipping off all the peaks and it's adding all these harmonics. And basically what happens is as signals like decay down, they decay into this bed of distortion. And it just has this really blown out, but still sonically pure. It's kind of like combining both worlds of like, you know, like an overblown, like old cassette or something like that. And a really clean, pure, dry signal.
You mentioned you liked using automation. What things do you like to automate in your mixes?
I mean, the first thing I almost always automate is the master fader, honestly. I mean, obviously, the most common place for automation is the vocals, right? Manually de-essing things, bringing up vocals between like verses and choruses is a common problem because generally the instruments are a little bit more chill during the verses, so the vocals go down a little bit. But I would say most of the automation time is spent on the vocal because to me, the vocal is the premier instrument and I'm trying to do as much articulated moves as possible, whether it's like volume automation, effects, subtle effects throwing automations, making vocals wider during the choruses, automating like, you know, widening effects during the choruses or automating backgrounds to kind of come up around the edges. And then, you know, like one thing that I'll do a lot that you know, people don't always seem to do is automating just the master fader. And so just, you know, turning the last chorus up a half a dB and the intro down a dB and literally just kind of creating a little bit of an arc to the entirety of the song really seems to, make a big impact. And sometimes it's pretty hard edge. Like it's not like, oh, I'm going to turn this up. Like at the downbeat, I'll literally make like a square so that that downbeat is all of a sudden 1 dB louder, right? And that little bit of snap, you know, then it usually buckles into the limiter more because that automation's pre-limiting, pre-clipping. So you got to be very good with your gain staging again, where that 1 dB up, that doesn't mean that you're just getting 1 more dB of clipping because the gain staging of the whole session is set. You know, like I said, I usually put gold clip first in the master fader. So if I'm automating into a clipper, I want to make sure that the loudest automation point is still below, you know, the hard edge clipping if I'm trying to keep it clean. You know what I mean? And so automating the master fader is super powerful. It's what makes people like hype when they listen to the song. They're like, damn, this, you know, like they feel every section more because, you know, a lot of modern music tends to feel hyper compressed, whether it's like, you know, computer made, like, you know, like drum machine and synth all in the box, arranged music. That stuff dynamically is pretty static. A snare drum's 127 velocity straight through the song and it never goes up or down almost, right? And so going in and creating like these little changes in energy, whether it's, you know, 1 dB, which is like a 10% perceived change in energy, can be very powerful and really like make things sound explosive. So yeah, I got that one from Bank and my friend RJD2, this instrumental hip hop producer. And he would just in the club, just like volume ride tracks. And he originally asked me to do that on some of his masters a while ago. And it just sounded amazing. And it was such like a cheat code, like a simple thing to do. And so that became a really big part of my mixing process was, you know, markering out the song and then automating between all those sections.
Great. What are the most important things to consider, to achieve a loud mix before achieving a loud mix?
It's a good question. You know, I get that question a lot. Like, why can't I get my music to be loud? And it really has to do with balance. If you like what a limiter does for me, if I'm mixing a record and I turn it up with a limiter, push into the limiter to get it loud, it's going to tell me right away whether I have too much low end, right? Because if I have too much low end, it's going to start to modulate and buckle down from the low end. So the limiter is going to react. It's just a dumb thing, right? It's going to react to the loudest thing in the mix. And generally mixes focus around 90 hertz, right? And they fall down to the subs and they fall down to the mid range, low mid range, and mid range, and high frequencies, right? And so that like 80 to 100 hertz is where a limiter is going to see. It's going to react to that, right? And so if you have too much of that, and then the limiter's got to push that down, it's going to it's going to buckle the mid range down as well. It's going to get even darker, and so it's just going to sound muffled and ugly, right? And so what a limiter can tell you about is the spectral balance, or just like the EQ balance of your mix, and whether it's wrong. If you can't get it loud, it's most likely got too much of that 80 to 100 hertz, right? Where it's focused too much there, or it's too bright already. And then as you turn it up, it just gets more and more fatiguing, right? And so it's really the secret to a loud mix is first arrangement in a mix or in a song. Like the song matters more than the mix, right? If there are like 5 instruments in unity or in unison in the mix, right? There's like 5 instruments playing in the exact same range, and everything's in the same, harmonic range, and it's cluttered. It's really difficult to get that loud. If it's just like one instrument in drums and bass, it's really easy to get that loud. If it's one instrument, no drums and bass, it's even easier to get that super loud because it's just one particular thing that the limiter and all the processing has to kind of navigate the dynamic shape of. But when it's like a complex waveform, when there's all these instruments on top of each other, that's when it starts to become more audible because you can hear how one reacts to the other. So the first thing is arrangement of the song. Second thing is the relationship of the mids the low frequencies to the rest of the mix. And then those are the 2 leading things, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions from the audience now.
Sure.
And the first one is, what is the process for making a plugin, and how long does it take?
The process for making a plugin is first coming up with an idea, right? And it has to be a good enough idea that you're going to spend a lot of time on, right? You can make a plugin that's like a fader and a mute button probably in a day, or in like a half a day probably, but nobody really wants a fader and a mute button as a plugin. And so, when you're building a plugin, it's just like a song, it's really all about the original idea and how, that dictates a lot of it. And then how complex the plugin is. Like Gold Clip and Orange Clip are pretty complex. There's a lot of like interdependencies in them, and there's a lot of intercommunication and kind of code that's custom, that's very, difficult to make and takes different skill sets of coders. But, the first thing is coming up with an idea, and then being honest with yourself about whether it's an idea that you think people will want. You can have this fascinatingly complex thing and everyone's like, cool, I don't need that. You know what I mean? I've had people, pitch ideas where I'm just like, they're outrageously complex, and I'm like, I don't know why I would want that, And then, so then there has to be some like functional marketplace for it. And it has to be able to tell a story in a short elevator pitch story, like what is the point of this thing? And it has to have like a very discrete meaning from like a music maker's perception. And then, there's a couple different aspects of it. There's making the actual DSP, which is the signal goes in, the signal goes out, what happens to it. That can be really complex, and it can be or very simple. And then there's the UI, which is how the user interacts with that DSP. And so generally those 2 things are separate. You make the DSP maybe first, and then you design a UI and put it on top of it. Or you can come up with an idea, design the UI, and then code the DSP into it, which can help with what you would call like scope creep or mission creep, where you're developing it and you're like, so, what if we could do this? And what if we could do this? And then like 3 years later, you've tried all these things and you don't like any of them, and you don't really have a viable product, viable plugin. But basically it's idea, interface, DSP, problem solving, like beta testing, making sure it works on Windows with their garbage Windows 10 thing, and like all the kind of chaotic different versions of Windows machines that exist, and all the DAWs that exist on that side, and then all the DAWs that exist on Mac. Mac is a much easier world to develop for because it's a closed system. Every Mac is theoretically the same. And really all you have to deal with is all the way that different DAWs work. And that's an easier thing to deal with than it is on the Windows world. But yeah, idea, DSP, UI. And then after that, you have to like figure out how to like sell it and license it and maintain a database of people. And there's it is a very, I didn't know what I was getting into when I started. I was kind of just making it for myself. And it turned into like a whole other job that I didn't anticipate it becoming, but I'm thankful for it. It's been a lot of fun, but yeah, it's a complicated process. Gold Clip took me about 2.5 years. Orange Clip took me about 1.5 years. High Fall took me 3 years. But I build pretty dense, deep plugins, and I price them that way. And not all plugins need to be like that. But it's just like the space that I decided to do it in because I want to use it. And so for me to use it, like something that I'm going to use in every song, like I want it to have like this scope and this kind of experience. And so, yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of work, but it's totally viable. All I did was just Google and ask people and figured out how to do it over time. So it's completely possible. If somebody's inspired and thinks they have a good idea, I say pursue it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So when are your new plugins coming out?
High Fall will be out soon. I've stopped creating dates just because it'll sound stupid when a date passes and it didn't come out. But there's so many interdependencies with something like this where like, you make a plan and you fix something, but that fix causes this other problem. And like sometimes, and so it can go on and on. But High Fall, I'm planning for September, end of September-ish. Oh, cool. And then I have like a multi-band compressor in the works. I have some really innovative dynamic processors in the works. I have this really innovative equalizer in the works. The stuff that the next wave of plugins that I'm developing are going to be like future plugins, like kind of like the Soothe, like, when Soothe came out, everyone was like, what is this? I didn't think this was possible. The next wave of plugins that I'm going to put out is going to be in that lane. And so those are cooking up now, and those will be out in 2026.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah.
Here's another question from the audience. Do you have a loudness target when mixing or mastering?
Not really. It's completely dependent on the genre and the production and the rest of the album, maybe. But, things swelling up short-term loops to like 5 is loud and okay. Average loudness of -9, like program loudness, I'd say is like a very common loudness for a lot of music. That's maybe a little bit less loud than most music, I would say. But if I'm doing a rock record, it's going to be a little bit louder than that. If I'm doing like an Afrobeat record or a rap record, it might be a little bit quieter than that, depending on the style of it. A lot of like Afrobeats music is pretty low level. Not low level, but lower than most American music because it's more about transience and bounce than it is about like kind of standing up tall, like, being aggressive sounding. And so usually the target is around 9. And then if like the genre vibe is more aggressive, then it gets louder. And then if the vibe is, more chill, then it goes quieter. But like 9 is kind of the program loudness that is like a pretty decent target.
If you're going to master your mix, do you do it in a separate session?
It depends. Again, I did a record with Bank where we mastered every song. Like the mix and mastering process didn't get disentangled like they were one process, because that's the way that he thought about the music. And so in that situation, the master happened at the mix, and that record got nominated for Best Sound Engineered Album for a Grammy. So that was obviously perfectly fine to do it that way. But generally, I prefer to take everything and put it in a mastering session and then go through and make them all kind of even. The problem with mastering your own mixes is that you're always going back to the mix. And whenever an artist is never going to give you notes on the master. If you're mastering your own mix, they're going to give you notes on the mix. And so like decoupling those two processes can be really difficult, because then you have to go back, change the mix, print that, maybe print all the alternates, then put it in the mastering session, and then change the master. It can be pretty laborious fast. And so oftentimes you get caught into the cycle of like mastering and mixing at the same time, especially if it's like a single. If it's a whole album, I generally try not to master my own mixes. I really don't want to, because it's just, like I said, a never ending cycle. But if I have to, I do. Or if the person prefers, I do. So.
Can you explain the difference between gold clip and orange clip and when you would use it?
Sure. Gold clip is more of like a pristine mastering device. It goes on your mix bus. It's very articulate, and it can sound transparent and clean and adds loudness, and is just very kind of robust mastering tool. Orange Clip 3 is, first, it's multi-band right now. It emulates the soft clipper and FL. And so it's like basically like an aggressive, hyped up version of Orange Clip or of Gold Clip, where it's like very distortion forward, very aggressive forward. It can still be clean and out of the way, but it's much more of like a kind of a aggressive tool where you can abuse it and it gets kind of these really interesting results. And then the fact that it's multi-band, you can clip individual bands, you can like bypass all the clippers and isolate just the mids and just use one clipper and distort like just the mid-range of something. And so you can almost like use it as like a surgical distortion tool. And so it's very powerful. Generally the way that I use it, and I see that a lot of way that people use the tools together is a lot of people have Gold Clip on the mix bus, right? And it's maybe the first thing or right before the final limiter. And then they may couple that with Orange Clip and do like some subtle Orange Clip wave shaping, like the super round wave shaping, or just some multi-band processing. And then on the individual tracks, people put Gold Clip track. And to me, that's like it's almost like a console overdrive, right? You put it on a track, you put the ceiling right to the clip or the peaks, and then you add bits of orange, and it kind of creates the saturation overtones and overdrive. Or you put Orange Clip on individual tracks in multi-band mode, and you kind of like insert these distortions. And then each band has like a gain on it and a dry wet. So you can like insert a bunch of distortion on the mid-range, put it at 50%, and then turn up the mid-range gain. So now you're like adding distortion, you're making it louder. So you're like EQing and distorting and compressing like all at the same time. It can be super, super powerful. It's a dense tool. It's a small plugin, and there's like a lot of density in it when you turn on the multi-band processing. But they work really well together. They're similar in design, so you kind of get the design language right away. But one is clean, pristine, kind of like classic mixing and mastering tool, and the other one is like modern electronic music, pop music, rap music, aggressive distortion tool.
I forgot to ask you before, are you still using your Trinov?
I am. Yeah, I have my Trinov on my speakers. Obviously, they don't use Trinov for headphones, but yeah, I couldn't live without my Trinov. I am in a somewhat compromised room. It's like 16 by 14, and the ceilings are like 10 foot. It's not a small room. It's not a huge room. But it's treated well, but it's not a custom built room. And I struggled to mix in here before I had the Trinov, even though I had the keys. But the Trinov allows me to the biggest thing is, it does the room correction. But the other thing that I do quite a bit is EQ the room, because I have, my own preferences for the way that I think things should sound. So I'm kind of constantly inverting the EQ of my room so that it sounds exactly right to me and then translates perfectly well to the rest of the world. So that, like, I think there's like a 32 band equalizer in the Trinnov where you can really tune your room, and it's quite helpful. I usually open that thing up like once a month and make some adjustments and keep dialing it in. It's been very helpful.
Cool. Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.